Welcome everyone to the third session of our Getting Off Gas series, all electric homes, solar, EV and batteries. My name is Dr. Rachel Goldlust and I'm the sustainability researcher here at Renew. I want to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people in central Victoria. I express my gratitude in the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual and cultural costs of that sharing, and my hope that we may walk forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. This event series is part of our Getting Off Gas Toolkit, where we are supporting households to slash energy bills, cut emissions, and minimise health risks associated with burning fossil fuels in our home. At Renew, we recognise that Australian homes must be at the centre of the renewable energy transition. That's why our toolkit is dedicated to supporting residential electrification and will provide practical, independent resources for households on replacing gas with efficient electric appliances. Our set of online resources will detail every step of household electrification and include material from Renew's extensive archive, as well as handy fact sheets and case studies that detail the experiences of families who have successfully transitioned away from household gas. You can check out the toolkit at www.gettingoffgastoolkit.com. We'll put the link in the chat for quick access. We continue our work, taking into account the exciting announcement by the Andrews government that will bring in a ban on gas connections for all new developments. From the 1st of January 2024, planning permits for new homes and residential subdivisions in Victoria will only connect to all electric networks. These changes will apply to all new homes requiring a planning permit, including new public and social housing delivered by Homes Victoria. Tonight, we'll be focusing on how all electric homes intersect with solar panels, batteries and EVs now and into the future. This is an exciting topic with a whole lot to get our heads around. As many of us are coming to realise, the savings that can be made by getting off gas can be doubly realised by households with solar PV. Data has shown that new homes with all electric appliances can save up to $700 per year on energy bills as it stands under the current market rate offer, while efficient houses with solar can cut bills by up to 80%. By choosing an all-electric home with solar PV, a new home buyer will be in the order of $9,000 to $18,000 better off over 10 years as compared with establishing that home as a dual fuel, i.e. electricity and gas, without solar. So where do we start with this big and complex issue? And what should we be mindful of when thinking about swapping out appliances and how their benefit can be maximised by solar power? What are the main pitfalls of solar and batteries? And what can we arm ourselves with when considering putting solar power on or planning for an EV? Is it worth moving towards batteries now or waiting to see what happens with pricing and electric vehicle technology? But not to fear. We are incredibly lucky tonight to be joined by three fantastic panelists. Firstly, I would like to welcome Anthony Broese van Groenou, co-founder, director and CSO of the Good Car Company. The Good Car Company coordinates community bulk buys as they work towards accelerating the uptake of electric vehicles in Australia. Ant is no stranger to renewable energy, combining it with his community development work over the last 20 years. In his spare time, Ant is a PhD candidate at the University of Tasmania, researching smart grids, battery energy systems, and electric vehicle integration. Thank you for joining us, Ant.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Also joining us is Catalina Villaro Dixon, Solar and Business Manager at the Yarra Energy Foundation, assisting businesses in boosting their energy efficiency and transition to solar power. Her prior role as the Energy Advice Services Manager at the Australian Energy Foundation armed her with extensive knowledge in residential electrification. Post completing her Masters in Sustainable Science and Policy, she has been actively involved with several environmental community groups, deepening her understanding of community batteries, clean technology, and sustainable farming. Hello, Catalina.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
And finally, let's welcome our last panelist, Jenny Paradiso. Named 2016 Australian Telstra Businesswoman Entrepreneur of the Year and one of AFR's 100 Women of Influence in 2019, Jenny is co-founder and managing director of the national solar and battery storage company, Suntrix. Having started her career as a librarian, Jenny established the business in 2009 and has grown Suntrix from the kitchen table to a multi-million-dollar company. Over the last 14 years, the company has evolved from a residential solar company to also include commercial solar, battery storage, EV charging, and energy consulting. Jenny has been listed among Smart Company's top 30 female entrepreneurs. She is a board member of the Clean Energy Council and a past board member of the South Australian Entrepreneurship Advisory Board and the Premier's Climate Change Council. Thank you for joining us, Jenny.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So what a fabulous and full panel we have tonight. We want to acknowledge our Getting Off Gas Toolkit sponsors, notably Pure Electric, our gold sponsor, Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action as our silver sponsor, and Be Energy Efficient as our bronze sponsor. The Getting Off Gas Toolkit has also been made possible with the support of the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and Boundless Earth. So before we kick off with our panel discussion, and there will be plenty of time for questions for our panelists after, we want to share a short video with you.
Gas is something that will never be renewable. In order to make renewable methane, you'd have to capture the methane coming off of landfill sites. That's not something that we can really do.
We ended up installing an 8.8 kilowatt system that was probably a little oversized for what we need, but we are future planning for an electric vehicle, which we don't have yet. And it's 8.8 kilowatt system with an 8.2 kilowatt inverter. So it's a little bit oversized. And it's been really great. We sometimes generate up to, I think around 65 kilowatt hours was the max that we get on a really nice sunny summer day. But even the other day, the solstice, I think we generated 26 kilowatts or something that day.
The EV was brought about, I guess, much by that energy audit that I did of the home. I found that the car was by far the biggest user of energy in the home. Because we're powering the EV from renewable sources means that I can have guilt-free travel.
Just being more self-reliant with our solar system, and even if you're just using power from the grid, knowing that we can just, generally speaking, there's a lot more renewables on the grid at the moment. So if you do have an electric hot water system, you can power that by renewables, which you can't do when you're on gas. We don't have to cut back our usage. We can run, a bath and it can get replenished by our solar system compared to just having to run the gas.
Roof space could be better used by putting solar panels on rather than the evacuated tubes. The heat pump hot water services, they work day or night. You can, and they have that coefficient of performance that you just don't get with resistive heating.
Solar pays back really quickly. Right now, with the way that gas and electricity prices are, it pays back in between 3 and 6 years. So it's a really good investment, and there's a lot of things that are coming down the pike with no to low interest loans that can, if you can't afford it up front, there might be programs that may help you.
Gas can never be renewable, so we need to get to a renewable energy situation as quickly as possible in order to have a chance of keeping the planet livable.
I hope you all enjoyed our video. So let's get started. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions prior to the event. We will hope to get to some of them throughout the session. And during our discussion, I will be putting viewers' questions to our panel. You can put your questions into the Zoom Q&A window at the bottom of your screen, and we will try and get to as many of them as we can. Please be mindful that questions that are too specific or detailed may not be appropriate for a panel event setting, and hopefully your questions may be answered by a conversation with our panelists. So I'm going to get started. It's such a huge topic and there's so many ways into it, but I want to ask Jenny about how we can start to use existing forms of renewable energy like solar or storage like batteries to make an all-electric home more efficient and cheaper to run. Can you just run through that for us?
Thanks, Rachel. We have a lot of homeowners and also businesses, I've got to say, come to us and talk about first steps to become fully electric. And I think it's fantastic that the federal government are having a look at this, as well as a lot of the state governments as well. So we have a look at what's going to give you the best bang for your buck straight away. And solar is still one of the best places to start. And one of the reasons for that is it's very rare to be able to buy an asset for your home or your business that will actually give you a return. Most of the time, if we buy something, it costs us money, we use it, that's great. This will actually make you money. So it's quite unusual to be able to buy a capital investment that's actually going to give you a return like solar does. So we always start by looking at the solar because there's generally enough, everyone uses electricity, even if you're still moving your transition. And then what we do is we have a look at how much electricity you're using at the moment and have a look at whether you want to get a solar system that's going to meet your current requirements, whether you want to upgrade it now to meet your future requirements, or whether you look at that in the future. And then after that, we have a look at batteries, EV chargers, and then all of the other products that you can actually add to your home as well, such as air source heat pumps and everything else I'm sure is going to be discussed today.
Awesome, thanks. Catalina, did you have anything you want to add from a Yarra Energy Foundation perspective?
I think Jenny explained it very well. From a Yarra Energy Foundation perspective, obviously we think that community batteries have an immense power in not only bringing the community together, but also as one to greenify the grid, and not only to do it individually per house. But otherwise, you know, if you can put solar on, because it's the best cost wise. And yeah.
And then you're going to be able to move through into the next stage. So, Ant, I'll bring you in here. What do you think are the barriers currently facing people looking to put solar on and then moving into getting an EV?
Well, I mean, it is probably education and probably housing tenure as well. If you're lucky enough to have a house that you can put solar on, perfect. But also understanding, you know, even with the premium feed-in tariffs, the best way to make the most value out of your solar to get that return on investment is to put that into storage so that you can utilize it to put it into self-consumption and then put it into your car when you're offsetting fuel costs. That's amazing how fast that payback is on solar compared to, you know, just regular consumption when you're looking at a higher value, you know, combustible liquid that you're displacing. It's really cool. And I'm so excited about the idea of those big batteries on wheels being able to be utilized in the grid, or even being able to utilize backing up your home. But it's phenomenal, the potential for this distributed storage transition through electric vehicles. It's probably going to be the fastest rollout of batteries that we will ever see.
I mean, there's two ways of thinking about this, and in the work that we've done, I've noticed that a lot of people want to look at all electric homes, and then a whole bunch of other people want to look at all electric homes plus vehicles. So obviously you sit in that camp, but like Catalina, where would you sit in that kind of conversation about, do you consider the savings and the costs if you add in a vehicle, or do you just look at them as a household first?
It really depends on the budget and where your house is at. A lot of houses in Melbourne also, they don't have access to a parking space. So that is going to be a big challenge. With the new battery we're working on, we're trying to integrate an EV charger to it to make it accessible to the community. and hopefully accelerate that transition to EVs to apartment residents, or strata blocks, etc. So I will start with solar, as Jenny said. It's very efficient, and then wherever your appliances are and how old they are as well. If they are at the end of their life, then consider replacing them first, the car included.
Yeah. I mean, we should go back to basics a little bit and talk a little bit about solar power and appliances. So, Jenny, can you run us through just a little bit about what draws the most power, and then how can a battery help you manage that?
Yeah, okay. Let's see, what draws the most power in the home? We find most of it's to do with heating and cooling. And that can be a challenge if you're talking about batteries. If you have a home with big three-phase stomping air conditioner, very hard to actually cover that with the battery. So what we do is we have a look at where your main, other than your heating and cooling, what you can cover with your solar. If I can just go back to what Ant was saying as well, and also Catalina, in regards to the cars, everyone has different homes and different ways of living. The apartments are always a little bit of a challenge, and we talk to a lot of builders who are building residential blocks, homes, but also even just businesses. And the thing that we're always raising with them is you need to start looking at EV chargers and make sure that you've got that infrastructure set up now. Because even though not everyone has an EV charger this very minute, you're looking at 5 to 10 years' time. Most of the people in the apartment block that you've just built are going to want to charge their cars. So I recognise that there are still some challenges with people who live in apartments or shared housing. If you live in a house, we're going to guess that in the next 5, 10, definitely 15 years, most people are going to be driving EVs. So this is kind of the thing that we look at, start with solar now. Do you want to get a battery? Do you want to look at a battery on wheels and wait to put that one in? Let's get the infrastructure and the cabling in now if you're building a home, so that even if you're not ready to do it this very minute, when you are ready, you can easily upgrade what you've got, or you've got that infrastructure and that cabling in place to make it easier for you when you're ready to go.
Yeah. Ant, do you find that is a conversation that you're having quite often?
All the time. And it is that future-proofing thing as well, even though people aren't, a lot of people aren't ready for an EV yet, but pretty much everyone says it's going to be their next vehicle. And like Jenny says, planning ahead is so much cheaper than having to do any sort of retrofits. It's that future-proofing and, adding value to your home as well in doing that.
Well, I guess then that begs the question of, where does the home battery fit into this trajectory? If we're talking about, do you tell people to just skip that and go straight to an EV? Is that
no? Because
there?
at the moment, no, it's not. We have trials. So in South Australia, that's the only place where you can actually use the bidirectional chargers at the moment. So we're looking at working with other networks and how that will be rolled out. There's quite a bit of background work which has to be done in terms of harmonisation of standards, both from state to state, but then internationally as well, for grid-connected inverters and just bringing in technology transfer, and to that other point, policy transfer and regulatory transfer. But once all those parts are lined up, which is, it has to happen. We need to be able to utilise these big batteries in the most efficient way. And that's the best way that we can have this massive uptake of EVs that we will see in the next 5 to 10 years. It's the way to be able to coordinate it and stabilize the grid and actually get ourselves to a grid that can be 100% powered by renewables, by utilizing all these distributed storage assets. And it'll be beautiful just to see those business models that actually reward people to participate in the energy system more so. Yeah.
It is wild when you just think about it as being the death knell of petrol stations, like that one thing that we're so used to seeing on every corner, and then you think about what happens when they're not needed anymore. It's a wild construct. So, well, getting back to batteries, so I mean, there is a lot of push. There's a lot more push for people to move off grid. So where does this sit within the whole question about, like, we'll go back to housing before we get back into EVs. So how does having an all electric house work if you're going to be off grid? Jenny, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We talk to a lot of people who live in metro suburbs who are asking about going off grid, which is very different to living in a regional area where the cost to get a grid connection is too high and that is your only option. Now, this is a personal opinion, and I talk to people who agree and disagree with me, but my opinion is if you can stay on the grid and become all electric, that's going to give you more options. It will still give you security of the grid if you need it. It will still make you independent within your own home. You will still be paying a supply charge to your electricity retailer and your DNSP, but that's kind of the only downside. As I said, that's my personal opinion. That way you can still, and Ant's right. By the way, I live in South Australia, so we are seeing the vehicle to home coming in more, where you can actually use your car as a battery for your home. So if you've got solar, you've got all electric appliances, you have some smart devices, and there are a lot of them around, and there are a lot being developed. You have a smart device that knows when to turn your dishwasher on and when to pull from your battery and when to pull from the grid or from your solar panels and when to pull from your car and when to charge your car. And, it does all of that very smart. It's great. Providing you've got one of those and you've got all of your you've got your solar panels actually giving you generation, and you've got a battery and or an electric vehicle, you can become very, very independent from the grid. As I said, my personal opinion is I'd prefer that we actually stay on there as well. And then you can take advantage of some some EV tariffs that are coming in, for example, in South Australia, where you can actually charge your car really cheap. Or eventually you hopefully will be able to sell that energy back into the grid and make a profit for it as well. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, Catalina, go.
If I can add to this as well, you need to have the profile to be able and willing to live off grid. So sometimes when we don't realize is that off grid means that there will not be any electricity sometimes. My family, we have an off-grid house in Spain, and sometimes, it's cloudy, the panels are not producing anything, there's no more electricity in the batteries, and we have to do with it. We have to light up candles and, light up a fire to cook. So if you live in a rural situation where there's a lot of blackouts, then, yes, it's not going to change much. But otherwise, I wouldn't say no to a grid connection just to live off grid, unless you're very nerdy and you love it.
There's so much to love about the grid anyway. It's such an incredible piece of infrastructure when you just look at the scale of that engineering masterpiece. It's just phenomenal. I think it's a thing of beauty. I don't like the way that it's run a lot of the time, but there is so much that could be done that we can all participate in a much more efficient way with that energy grid. And that's the thing, is that we're getting to that point that households and your vehicles, which I don't think there's too much of a distinction between them in the near future, they become critical grid infrastructure. And that's amazing. And that there's already, looking at different retailers, energy retailers, and the way that we can interact with the grid exporting energy. Companies like Amber Electric that do, they allow households to get wholesale energy market pricing. So great, whilst the prices are high, not great for everybody else, but it's the time that if you have storage, you can really capitalize on that. And it's that arbitrage in between when it's negative prices as well. You can also get it. And there's smart systems that automate that whole process for you. And the idea is with that, eventually those massively high prices fluctuating for frequency control and demand response are going to be diminished, and we won't have retailers playing or generators playing the energy market in the same way. We'll get a much more democratic energy system where we all benefit. It's kind of cool to think that
Is that just wishful thinking, or is that actually happening? Because that was going to be my next question, was about the sort of market opportunities and the threats that are coming with this all electric vision.
Yeah, so it is happening. There, for Amber Electric, I think it's a $15 a month subscription fee, and then you just participate in the energy market in that same way. There's risks to it.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, the wholesale energy market is very different to regular energy that you get through a retailer. So they hedge those highs and lows, and you get a standard flat tariff. And so they make money when those gaps are in their favor, and sometimes they make a loss. Mm. By being able to have residential consumers in there, then that can make in the right scenarios, whilst we've had this energy crisis, it's probably not the best time to be in that system, because you'd need huge amounts of storage to be able to avoid those high prices. But in a more stable energy system, then it does make a lot of sense to be able to do that arbitrage and benefit from it rather than the retailers. And so there are some other rule changes which are happening as well, which is probably getting into way too much depth at the moment. So
that's all right.
Yeah.
Jenny, do you want to talk about some of the market opportunities maybe that you see in your business?
Well, I was going to say there's another organisation, another retailer who are providing some peer-to-peer trading as well. So rather than going into the market, the NEM, you can actually buy and sell electricity from other people who are generating it too. And I apologise to those who are doing it, because it's on the tip of my tongue and I cannot remember. Sorry?
Power Ledger?
Yeah, there you go. Power Ledger's one, but I'm thinking of one who's actually in South Australia as well, who are working on it. Yeah, but just there's so much innovation going on, and I love it. And 90% of it is consumer driven, which it always is when you're looking at wanting change and the regulations aren't moving hard enough and fast enough. We have especially on the board of the Clean Energy Council and some of the working groups that I'm on, not only for SA Power Networks, but also for distributed energy in general nationally. We see this distributed energy, okay, it's an amazing network, all behind the meter, so very hard to see and very hard to track. And we have a look at all of these goals that our federal and our state governments are talking about in regards to electrification of our nation. And we have a look at how that's going to happen. And this distributed energy is a huge part of it. Sometimes, sometimes I call us the poor cousins, with the chip on our shoulder going, well, what about us? We're just as important as utility scale and the solar farms and everything else. But we do actually have a really important part to play. And what I am curious about and excited but also concerned about is whether we can actually get all of those bits of the puzzle in place in time for us to be able to do it. Kind of like what Ant was saying, our vehicle in South Australia, there are ways that you can actually do vehicle to home, but they're still working on it in other states. How we actually make sure that we've got all of those connection approvals and requirements, how we can manage the surplus energy that's going into our grid at certain times without having to turn all the systems off. There's a lot of working parts that we're still trying to sort through. But I'm an optimist, so I actually feel like we're just going to get it sorted in time. And I think the consumers are going to be driving that. Consumers in industry are going to be driving that more than anyone.
Yeah, just last year we had 17% of the electricity produced in Australia coming from distributed energy resources, so from businesses and from residents, which is the highest we've ever done. And it's great to see, and at the same time we have some threats with the so-called duck curve, which is when we have a demand of electricity in the morning before everyone goes to work, and then back when everyone comes back from work. And so during that day, there's not much demand, but solar is producing excessively with nothing to really hold it. And yet again, another call for those batteries on wheels, and just generally more batteries to absorb this energy and smooth the line of electricity demand.
I mean, bringing it back to the household level, I was going to ask you, Catalina, about that. Do you, advise people about how to use their electric appliances differently based upon that kind of peaks and troughs and the way that the tariffs work if they don't have solar, for example?
Yes, well, in Victoria, it's rare to see variable tariffs. So cheaper during the day and then more expensive in peak times. It's more common in New South Wales and elsewhere in Australia. So if you have such tariff, and it's sometimes very hard to read it on your electricity bill, you can see block 1, block 2, and they don't really say what the timings are. So it's all very complicated. But if you see many lines in your electricity bill where you have all those numbers written down, call your electricity retailer and ask them, I'm on two tariffs, and what are the times? So then you know when you can put your washing machine on, when you can put your dishwasher, anything that will consume a lot of electricity, heating, hot water as well if it's electrical. Just do it during those times, because if it's cheap, it's because there's too much electricity and we need to use it.
Mm. Anything else you want to add, anyone, to that?
I think that is fascinating, that not enough energy is a problem in the grid, but also too much energy is really fascinating to think that we could actually get paid to utilize that energy, and indeed, like, big industrials get paid to switch down ramp demand during those periods. And yeah, it's storage is the answer to all of it. Storage, smarts, and education, getting people involved.
I think it personally, it's also just changing behavior and habits to understanding like which people are doing now, because people are becoming more and more aware of how expensive it is to heat their homes from gas. So it's creating very instantaneous behavior change, which is then leading to different decision making and different ways that people are looking to solve that particular problem. So I'll move into EVs, because that's going to be a hot topic that we haven't covered in any of the other sessions so far. So what do people need to think about in terms of what they're going to need and how to facilitate having an EV? We've talked already a little bit, but
so many variables. But I think the main thing is it is harder for people in apartments. There are solutions happening for that. So there's all these trials for on-street charging, charging from light posts. Makes a lot of sense. There's already distributed supply there. But as EVs, batteries are getting bigger and bigger, and I don't actually believe in needing these bigger batteries all the time that do 1,000-kilometer range. Often better to choose something that is much smaller, that's suited to the majority of your driving anyway. But in order to go electric, to drive an electric car and pick one that's actually suited to your lifestyle, I think making a basic assessment, understanding what your 90% of your daily commutes are. Most people, it's under 50 Ks. So choosing something that's appropriately sized and the right price. And, as far as charging infrastructure is required, a lot of times, most people are fine just to start off with plugging directly into your 240 volt power. Regular 10 amp power is more than enough to charge a car. You get 12 to 15 Ks of range per hour that you're plugged in from a regular power point. So if you drive 100 Ks in a day, in 8 hours, it's full. And that's the thing. If you're fortunate enough to be able to charge at home when the sun is shining, that's making the best use of your solar. And also sorting out that duck curve, or the opposite duck curve, when we got all that excess supply going in there. And in some states, in some areas where you get charged a curtailment fee for exports, so that's a good way to avoid that as well.
And you mentioned it before, Jenny, but and we won't go too deep into it because next week we're going to talk about wiring. But can you explain the difference between normal phase and 3-phase power, and when that comes into play in this?
Okay, most homes are either single phase or 3-phase. And when most people don't know either, and that's quite okay. I think when I moved into my first house, I don't think I even really thought about that when I was, in my early 20s. I always ask people, okay, so how big is your air conditioner? Because a lot of people with 3-phase need it for a reason. So they're either like my dad and they have a welding shed at the back, or they've got some pretty heavy equipment that needs it. There are rules and regulations in most states to determine limits on systems and exports based on how many phases you have, and also to a certain degree what size solar system and what size battery you can actually get based on your phases. And any good solar storage company is going to be able to give you advice on that without doubt. In regards to just thinking about wiring and forward planning, I talk to a lot of people who don't have an EV plant, aren't getting one for a few years. But if they're doing a new build, like if they're actually building a new house, we always talk to them about making sure that they've got the infrastructure, the wiring, you know, let's see, so if your switchboard's on one side of the house, but you're planning to have your EV charger on the other side where your inverter is, get all that cabling done as part of the build. That way you've got no external conduit. It looks nice. It looks nice and pretty. It's inside the cavity, so you don't have to worry about it. So we just give advice to that. Make sure that your switchboard has enough room in there so that if you need to add some extra switches in there later on or some extra circuits, then it's not going to be an entire upgrade. It's better to kind of plan for those things now rather than having to do it later. It'll be hard if you're in an existing home. And so when we have a look at that, a lot of the time, if you're thinking about doing batteries or EVs later and you've got an existing home, we'll give you advice as to whether it's worth doing something now or just put your solar in and then when you're ready, go and upgrade your system then.
I mean, it leads me to ask the question about the current state of the solar providers and there's, I think, the industry has been going great for, a decade or more, but there's definitely a lot of players who aren't particularly good. So how can you tell when you're getting a quote about your solar system?
I've been doing this for 14 years. So we started our business 14 years ago. The two things I do tell people is if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So look, there are some really good deals at the moment, but I have to say, especially over the last year, it just seems like a bit of a race to the bottom in pricing. And when you're when companies are starting to cut costs, then you're going to be missing out on something. And so anyone who's get a couple of quotes, have a look at how long they've been around, check what their reviews are like, ask lots of questions. But the thing that the things that I like to look at is, or the things to consider is, it's not just about your panels and your inverter, okay? So if you have a look at two companies and they're both selling the same panel and the same inverter, but they're different prices, there are reasons behind that. Some people pay their installers very little amount of money, so these guys go out there and try and smash it out as quickly as they can. They don't have the quality assurance, the quality checks afterwards to make sure the system's installed properly. Some companies don't have engineers, in-house engineers or electrical engineers who actually look and design your system, because you can design a system many different ways. Do I put it east and west because I tend to, because I use most of my electricity in the morning and the afternoon? Do I put it directly north? What happens if I put it here? What happens if I put it there? How do I string them? Do I need optimizers? Do I not? An electrical engineer or someone who knows what they're doing is going to be able to design your system better. So designing, installation, even the brackets that they use, it's no good having a good panel if your brackets aren't on properly. But then the other thing that we consider to be really important is your customer service after your installation. You want someone who you can actually call and say, hi, I've had my system for a month and it's just not doing what I thought it would. I don't know, or my inverter stopped working. Yeah, they do break down sometimes. If they're under warranty, it's not a problem. But my inverter stopped working. Can you come out and have a look at it? And we find that some of the cheaper, nasty ones, or the very small organizations, very big organizations, and I'm being very generalistic here, but a lot of them will get your system on, but actually being able to get on the phone with them afterwards and getting some help can be a bit of a challenge. So there's some of the things to look at rather than just going, same inverter, how come they're a different price?
Yeah, I have seen a few conversations come up recently on the My Efficient Electric Home Facebook group, which is a very good place to get information for all electric homes, that talks about people getting a smart meter and then realizing, hang on, is that appliance that I really use that much? Like, how important is it to get a smart meter when you go through this process? And because I see the questions come up and people are going, is that correct? Is that right? And is it just because they didn't know beforehand, and now that they've got a meter they can see it, or is it possible that there's faults in the system, I guess?
So when we first started, we weren't installing consumption monitoring, the smart meters. It just wasn't a thing. Now pretty much all of our systems are, because it is I love it. I love it on mine. I've got it on a little app and I can see how much I'm using. I can see if the kids get home and turn on all the lights. I can see if they use the washing machine at night time when they know they're not allowed to. You know, we do everything during the solar time. It just gives you a much better understanding on how you're using energy and how much, like even just things like, I realized the tiny little heater that I use in my office was actually using and this is me, I should know better, you know, and it wasn't until I turned it on and checked my app and had a look at the difference when it was on and off, and I went, holy shit, I'm not using that one anymore. So it makes you more aware, and kind of like what Catalina said before, it's all about awareness. It's about educating people, having them understand how and when they're using electricity. And if you're an informed user, you're gonna understand how the solar works and the batteries and what you need. So it costs more to put one of those meters on. If you're buying solar, if you're buying a battery, you basically get it anyway. But if you're just getting solar, it does cost more to get it on. But if you can afford the extra couple of $100, I do recommend it.
And how does it work when you're sizing for a home and a future EV and or battery? So how do you start to have that conversation, and is it worth doing it staged or doing it in one go?
Everyone's different. That's the other good reason to have a meter. You can actually see when you're using electricity, and that all of our costings, all of our modeling is all based on assumptions. So if we don't have your actual data for when you're using electricity, we make assumptions. Do you use it mostly during the day? Do you use it at night time? What are your weekends like versus your daytime? You know what, one of the biggest challenges that people have is that just don't have enough roof space for enough solar. And a lot of people ask me, should I get a battery? And the first thing I say to them is, if you've got solar, do you have enough extra electricity generated from your solar panels to store into your battery? If you don't, then you're doing the arbitrage modeling that Ant was talking about before, and the financials there you really need to look at. I'm not sure, in most cases we're not quite there yet. But if you've got enough extra solar on your roof to be able to store in your battery, that's a pretty good first step. As for whether you do it all at once or not, look, a lot of time it's just budget. And if you've got budget constraints, then start with your solar, monitor it for a year, see how it goes. If you're building a new home and you're just moving in, we had one client who got a really good size solar system, has monitored it for a year, knows that she actually wants 2 batteries, not 1, because of, you know, her energy use, and we can see that because we've been monitoring it, and now she's getting a battery.
Super simple battery that often gets overlooked is just your hot water system. Putting energy into that's an amazing way to store power.
How do you do that?
By making sure that your hot water is actually heating when you do have that surplus energy from your solar.
Adding a timer to it if it's not.
Yeah, saves so much money. And like Jenny was saying, you know, having that energy monitoring app might be an extra couple of $100, but just being able to see how you can modify your behavior, the payback on that is pretty quick if you're able to switch your load.
Especially if you don't have solar and you're paying for your electricity.
Yeah.
So we can talk about batteries, because I know I'm interested, Catalina, in your discussions around community batteries. I'd like you to talk a bit about it, because I don't know much about what a community battery is and how it works, and then also how how this can be like scaled?
So this is a very big question. The Victorian government here in Victoria, we have storage targets, 2.6 gigawatt hour, I believe, by 2030. And then the federal government also wants to install around 400 batteries to begin with. They are all used primarily for grid support, so to smooth out that curve of electricity demand, and also to capture all those renewables, and that way we can rely less on coal power. The communities, besides grid support and market arbitrage and all of those fascinating topics, it's also a community empowering tool. The way we installed our Fitzroy North battery in Melbourne is we engaged the community, and we had champions that were there to talk with the neighbors and really discuss, where do we want the battery, what's the noise of the battery, is it dangerous, is it gonna light on fire, explode, all of those questions, and just make sure that everyone wants the battery, accepts the battery, and want it in the neighborhood as a characteristic. So that's really important to us. There are different types of batteries as well and how they work. The one we have, it's a trial, so it's just to see how it can work in the low voltage network that connects a neighborhood together, the same cables. How it works in terms of emissions, in terms of renewable capture. So it's not yet at the stage where people can use it as their own battery, and have a little software where they can store the battery. Some other distributors and retailers, they're trying to do something like that, a bit like a VPP, virtual power plant. So there's different models, and all in all, it is really to capture the renewables in the grid.
And how big are we talking, like size-wise?
It's around 4 big fridges. Yeah, it depends. You have the grid scale batteries, so in Phillip Island, sorry, I'm talking very Victoria centered. There's a field of containers, and those are all batteries, in South Australia obviously as well, and here in urban areas it's fridges or small cars, and then we put art on it and make it beautiful.
Yeah, I've seen the photos. It does look great, and an interesting talking piece, I guess, to get the conversation in the community flowing. So I guess there's no way to not talk about the problem with batteries. Bigger picture being, if we keep running things off batteries, we're going to have to keep digging up the materials that require us to build batteries. So what do you say to that discussion, Ant?
I did for a long time have a lot of doubt about this whole process, particularly the batteries and the EVs. I'm a skeptic by nature, and just looking at the predicted life of batteries is far greater than what people were initially going with, and there's been so much cherry-picked, just crap out there that a lot of myth busting needing to be done. And I think when you look at the life that we're actually seeing out of even the older EVs that didn't have such a high level of sophistication with the battery management systems and cooling and whatnot, they still retain a heck of a lot of their life. The degradation curve is not as fast as first anticipated. But then those batteries, you can still squeeze another 10 to 15 years of life out of them as stationary storage. And with today's processes, we can recapture up to 98% of those materials from the batteries. We just need to get to that scale where it actually is economically viable to do that recycling. And that's with today's processes as well, with today's battery chemistries. So I really feel like we are going to be able to recapture a lot of those materials and repurpose them as much more efficient batteries. can't do that with petrol. You can't do that with gas. You burn it once and it's gone. Then we have to deal with all that problem fixing it up. I know it's not a silver bullet, but it's so much better than what we currently have. And you know, to everybody always saying that there's going to, you know, we're dealing with all these rare earth critical minerals that are they do have a big environmental and in some cases social impact as well, but there's also the market being the market. Like those ones, the price of those commodities is going to pretty much drive them out of use anyway. So there's new technologies with sodium batteries which are coming out there, which are doing away with a lot of those other cobalts being taken out of a lot of battery chemistries. So, you know, I feel relatively good that we're slowing our our it's not an inevitable rush into this human-induced apocalypse, but batteries do a lot to help.
I mean, I hear a lot people talking about how they're going to get one, but not yet. Is that it's a pretty common perspective? So I don't know when the not yet is going to be. When does that? It's been. If I feel like it's been like this for 5 to 10 years in the like they're too expensive, they'll get cheaper phase. What do you say?
Well, for EVs, they're already at the point where they do pay themselves off. So depending on what kind of EV you're getting, if you're spending $150,000 on a really premium high-end luxury EV, yeah, you may not make that. But when you look at that cost parity, one, you're offsetting the cost of fuel and maintenance. So the total cost of ownership, usually after 3 or 4 years, those EVs are already at cost parity with an internal combustion vehicle. And then every year thereafter, it's just like solar on your roof. It's virtually, well, very, very low cost transport. But then those batteries are amazing. Seeing them utilized in the home and in the grid, it's going to be a big game changer. And I think so to that point where people are saying, should I wait or should I get the newest, latest, greatest one? I don't know. We've got thousands and thousands of people that we talk to about their EVs, and I haven't heard anybody say that they wish they waited longer to get one. And I think for home storage, like we're getting closer to that point where it does actually make sense to have those home batteries as well. The economic case hasn't always stacked up, but depending on what your scenarios are and what your household consumption is, then it does make sense. And particularly when you're able to participate in the energy market more so, then yeah, it does start to stack up even environmentally.
And have you found that, Jenny, in conversations with people about that cost parity? Like, how do you do those kind of figures, and do you do them for your customers to get them to think about including a battery in there?
Yeah, we do. And I remember when we first started quoting batteries 5 years ago, maybe, you know, when there was interest, the general warranty lifespan of the battery was 10 years, and you would be lucky to pay it off in that 10-year period. Some did, but most of them didn't. Now, the early adopters still went for it because that payback isn't the only reason why people buy a battery. Yeah. It can be for a lot of different reasons. And now, let's see, I'm just trying to think. I'd say 90% of the proposals that go past me, and I don't deal with those a lot, but they all have a payback period well under 10 years. And you combine that with solar, it's looking really good. So when people first started asking me if they should get a battery, 90% of the time I said, probably not going to be worthwhile for a return on investment. Now 90% of the time I say, yes, it is going to be worthwhile for a return on investment.
Yeah. And there's a really important point to consider around those warranties as well, is that manufacturers don't put warranties on things that they actually think that they'll ever pay out on. And so, and it's also, it's not that warranty, once it goes beyond that time that they expect the battery to be totally kaput, that's just the degradation, usually down to like 80%, and you still have all that other user capacity. So yeah.
And so what are the solutions for people in apartments? You know, we talked about community battery that's in that developmental stage, but is there a solution for people to be able to share batteries? Is that something that's happening? Catalina, do you know anything about that?
Batteries, I mean, putting solar on apartments, it's already really hard. So, you know, putting batteries on before the solar, it's going to be harder. We've published a guide to solar for apartments just last year in collaboration with Sustainability Victoria and the Victorian government. And you will find a checklist of things to do to check before you can put the solar on the apartment, or just to see if it's feasible. It will have, there's so many features to take into account: the size of the apartment, but also the roof space, obviously, how many people are living there, the owners corporation. So you can download the guide for free and see you know, the journey for your apartment and how to get the panels there.
But do we think, like, a big picture thinking, is this a way to move forward with this idea, like about sharing more of the infrastructure rather than having individualized? Ant, do you have any?
So the question is, as opposed to having home batteries installed on every single house, is it better to have a community battery or?
Yeah. And I mean, building into what we talked about before in terms of this, what you said about sharing power, you know, if we can share power, should we not be sharing storage as well?
One and the same, I guess. It's the sharing of the storage.
If I can answer quickly, so the key to really do the, you know, make the transition and go towards net zero is sharing the solar electricity. We don't have enough roof space. We have too many people in urban areas, and we won't be able to do it without this. One of the issues is the cost. You have a lot of charges from all the actors of the electricity grid that really prevent this measure from being adopted by, you know, the residents that cannot install roofs, they're renters or they live in an apartment, and those huge warehouses that you can find anywhere in Melbourne that can install so much solar power, but there's nowhere for this power to go. So we are investigating now with City Power, the electricity, the distributor in the area, to lower those fees, those distribution fees, and then make this possible. It will take some time, but they are very optimistic project being done as well in New South Wales with the project Edith. Have you heard of it? That investigate all those lowering the tariffs and make this possible to share.
So just to add to that, we have actually installed solar on apartments in, well, we have in South Australia, but I do know of them being around other places as well. We use a really innovative product called SolShare, which is by Loom, which is an Australian company. And what that lets you do is put solar on the roof, and then there are smarts, the technology that actually shares that generation across to all the apartments who are in there. The challenge that we have with apartments is that you only have a certain amount of roof space, so it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to generate enough solar energy to cover all of the tenants' electricity requirements, plus store more to be able to cover their nighttime usage as well. So it's a good way to start in regards to solar, but I think it'd be difficult to have a full solution where they're completely independent. This goes back to your peer-to-peer trading, your opportunity for people to buy renewable electricity from another source because they can't actually generate it themselves. And I think we've got a long way to go with this. And it doesn't just affect tenants; it affects people who are renting. It does actually, I think, one of the areas that kind of gets lost, which I think is really important, are just those low socioeconomic people who have a home but just just don't have the extra funds to be able to invest in solar or battery, or can't get finance to be able to invest in solar or battery, you know, those people are really stuck. And everyone I talk to, I'm still trying to figure out a good solution. If anyone's got any ideas, please let me know. but even like that one aside, apartments, renters, if you can't actually, well, actually renters, landlords need to put it on. But if you're in an apartment or you've got too much shading, or there's a reason why you can't actually generate it yourself, you should have the opportunity to be able to do that peer-to-peer trading and buy it from someone else, the warehouse that Catalina was talking about, who's got more generation than they need.
Mm. And is that just market interference, or is that government not setting up the feasibility for that peer-to-peer to happen? Like, what's the barrier there?
I think Ant wants to, did you want to add to that, Ant?
Oh, I guess there's a cost to transmission, and looking at the role that DNSPs have within that, it's often overlooked that actually wheeling power from one place to another like that is an associated cost that we often don't really look at in it. So I feel there's obviously regulatory barriers, and who owns that infrastructure is a big part of how those costs are passed on, and also how that cost is spread amongst the entire network. You know, more often than not, it's the cost of grid augmentation is something that's spread across all users in the grid. So if we're able to have these systems where we've got more renewables and more storage together to stabilize it, then it does actually save the cost of having to do more gold plating to the grid.
Mm.
But yeah, I think that I just really want to get onto that low interest, like the low income, low socioeconomic, because that equity issue is always, or more often than not, left off the table, and it's people that could most benefit from having affordable power, better housing stock, and you know, clean, low cost transport. They're often the ones that can't get it because that upfront capital cost is often quite prohibitive, and so just being able to put pressure on decision makers to be able to offer low interest loans. I mean, states can borrow money at concessional rates and be able to support that. There are initiatives that are like ACT have a zero interest loan for a lot of energy efficiency. Most states have energy efficiency loans that are zero interest, but being able to look at that scope of it, and you know, in the ACT they include electric vehicles within that as well, and it's that kind of stuff that doesn't happen without having a great groundswell push, or just a really amazing those right people in those levels of bureaucracy that can put those policies forwards. But we all have a pretty big role in making our voices heard. We need to get everybody coming along in this transition. If we don't do it, if we leave out marginalized people, then we're not going to get to net zero by 2030 or 2050 or whenever the targets are. It needs to be inclusive of everybody, and the right kind of financing mechanisms are huge, along with education. Yeah.
Yep, that's definitely something that Renew's been working for, and something
Yeah.
that there's a lot of push out there in order to keep the governments accountable for the sort of funding promises that they do make in terms of their investments into energy efficiency, rebates and infrastructure. But yes, on our toolkit, we have a list of all of the concessions and all of the current rebates that are available across the states. If you want to check out what is available there for solar and energy efficiency upgrades, head to our gettingoffgas.com toolkit. So I'm going to go to some of the questions from the audience. Thank you for putting your questions into the chat. What is the timeline? How many years before they're readily available and efficient, and practicality for using a car battery storage for power to the home as opposed to standalone batteries? I know we did talk about that at the beginning, but can you just give us a sense of what that looks like?
Timelines, it's about getting more of those chargers here into Australia, the bidirectional chargers. So at the moment, the ones that were available, the only ones in Australia that got the AS4777 certification for the grid connected inverters, they've stopped manufacturing that particular charger. We've got another 3 different manufacturers that we've bought in their chargers, and they're going to get tested at the Smart Energy Lab in Healesville, which is a place where they can get tested for that, and also with people that help write the standards for these grid connected inverters. Don't know the timeline for that, but if we look overseas, if we're able to allow those same charges to be used here, then by 2025 we should start to see a massive drop in the price of that bit of hardware, and more vehicles that are enabled to do it. At the moment, the only vehicles that can do the bi-directional charging are the Nissan Leaf and things like the Mitsubishi Outlander, but the Nissan Leaf's the only one that really has a big enough battery to do it. And interestingly, pretty much all the vehicles out of Japan, they all have the bi-directional charging mandated in it for emergency response. So after Fukushima, they were rolling out electric vehicles to go and provide power for medical equipment and whatnot. I think here in Australia, even if there is a premium cost to those bi-directional chargers, you're unleashing so much more power. Like a Tesla Powerwall installed is still up around $16,000, depending on circumstances, but that's 10 kilowatt hours of usable storage or less. A 40 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf, 4 times the capacity, is now in the $30,000 mark. And that's amazing to be able to see that amount of storage capacity there that you could utilize. I think it's probably going to be the cheapest storage that we can possibly get. But
thank you. That's a good illustration of the pricing and what's happening in the industry. What is happening to all of the hybrid versions of EVs? Like, are they still popular? Are they still growing, or are people going?
The thing is with hybrids, they do serve they're good transitional. They're like beta cam. They're something that is great for going in between, better than petrol and diesel, but at the same time, you've got 2 drivetrains that you need to service all the time. And it's kind of like you're getting the worst of both worlds, that you're either lugging around a big battery whilst you're driving petrol, or you're driving on a small battery and lugging around a petrol tank and your internal combustion engine. But it is better than what we'd otherwise.
It's a gateway EV.
Yeah, it's a gateway EV. That's right.
Here's another question. I have both electric and gas heating and solar panels. In the evening, is it best to use gas as the grid electricity still comes from coal? How do you answer those kind of questions?
Oh,
Actually,
depends on what your priorities
sorry,
are.
Jenny,
Sorry, Catalina. Do you want to answer that one?
go for it.
I was just going to say, it depends on what your priorities are. Are you looking for financial gain, or are you looking for environmental reasons? If gas is the greener version to coal, although not fantastic, but still better than coal. But it depends on how much you're paying for your gas versus how much you're paying for your electricity at nighttime.
And also the efficiency of heat pumps, heat pump heating and air conditioning, that is so freaking incredibly efficient that there's no way you could beat that with gas.
Yeah.
So even if you are burning coal, you're still, the efficiencies that you get, it's probably going to have much lesser emissions than using gas.
There you go. Or just don't buy the electricity you buy, just buy green instead of getting it from coal. There you go. Solve both problems.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big market incentive that's been happening, green power, and the way that, it is forcing more renewables, big picture renewables, to be supplied into the grid. Did you want to say something, Catalina, on that?
It's also, environmentally speaking, using the electrical load, the gas system, the gas is, even if it's called natural, it's just, emissions. Whereas if you draw from the electricity grid, there will be some coal, but it will be mixed with hydropower, it will be mixed with wind power, and half renewable a lot of the time as well, and help build that electricity demand, and so we can reinforce the infrastructure and make it greener.
There's also the cost of health. you know, I saw that
As
question
well.
pop up there really
As well.
quickly. And it's not spoken enough that there's the cost to the planet and climate change that we can't not afford. But then just burning gas inside of your house, gas leaking inside of your house.
Yeah, it's something that
Literally.
once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't unsee it and you can't unfeel it. Since I've had this job, I've been much more diligent about my overhead range use, put it that way.
It's
Once-
crazy. In some places, you know, they don't even let you smoke cigarettes inside. Huh.
So a question from where did it go? From Sandra is, what is critical to future-proof my solar installation for battery and EVs for when I can afford them in the next stage? So you talked a little bit about planning, but let's say you're not building from scratch, Jenny. So what would you suggest for?
Future-proofing, so you're putting in solar and planning to put in batteries and EVs in the future. If you're planning to do it in the near future, max out your solar as much as you can, so that there's definitely excess generation from your solar that you can use for your battery. There's a lot of people, I get this question a bit as well about if you're getting solar now, should you get a hybrid inverter for your solar system, even though you don't have a battery, so that when you get the battery, it's there's so many people who advertise battery ready solar systems. Be careful, like any solar system you can add a battery on, and if you AC couple it, well, I'm not going to say any, you can generally add a battery by AC coupling it onto an existing solar system, or you can get a hybrid inverter as part of your solar system and connect the battery that way. If you're planning, and I can't give you a golden rule on this one. Every situation is different, depending on the products you plan to use, depending on the setup of your home, depending on what kind of time frame you're looking at putting in your battery after your solar. If you're looking at doing it in a couple of years' time, my personal opinion is don't invest in a hybrid inverter now and pay an extra $1,000 for it if you don't know when you're going to be installing your battery, because there are other ways of dealing with it. Then that's my opinion. There have been a few times where I've said, you know what, it's only an extra $500, and if you're going to get your battery in a year and you know what brand you're getting and we know that it's still going to be available, then consider upgrading to a hybrid inverter now. But again, you should be getting good advice from the solar company that you're talking to, and they can help you figure out what the best move is.
I would also say maybe, you know, just to be careful oversizing a system, really depending on how much electricity you use. But if you're putting a battery later, and especially if it's going to be an AC coupled battery, you might have limits set up by your distributor, and hopefully in 5 years those limits will only be a memory. But this is just to be aware that then might limit the installation of a battery.
I was just gonna echo Jenny's recommendation that if you are talking to your solar installer, provider, vendor, make sure that they're a reputable one who actually are doing what's in your best interest, rather than just trying to sell you that hybrid inverter with the package. Yeah.
It is hard to get reliable information, though. I think that's what we're doing these sessions for, to try and give people the idea that you do have to do some research, and that if it's like you said before, Jenny, if it's too cheap, there's probably a good reason for that. So one more question on EVs. Do EVs have the capacity to install new batteries once the old one dies?
Heck yeah, they do. We've already been doing them. It's great. It's amazing, actually, that we've been able to do it. We started watching YouTube. So amazingly, it took us like an hour and a half to do a battery upgrade. So we took an old battery that didn't have the kind of range that we wanted from an older Nissan Leaf, and we put in a much bigger battery. And it was a really, really simple process. So after that, after having a couple of different cracks at that, we went over to China to go and see some of the world's biggest battery factory over there, and see the new modules that they're creating, which have energy density that's like 4 times what the original ones were in there. And now there's 10 times the energy density. That they're up to 500 watt hours per kilogram. Like, that's phenomenal, that amount of energy density in a battery. Yeah,
And what
There-
does that cost when you do just a battery swap out? Just
So
whatever
the battery swap out, it depends. So depends what size battery you want to put in there. But yeah, that's a, a big question. It's going to be a hell of a lot cheaper than buying a new car. And I think that there's going to be a lot of third-party companies setting up those businesses, because manufacturers really aren't going to want to sell you a battery upgrade when they just want to sell you a whole new car. So I'm really excited to see that future. Like there's already a number of third-party battery providers here in Australia. So, and around the world, there are lots.
And I mean, this goes to my heart, because I'm not ready to get an EV, mostly because I'm a bit of a old car person. So what happens like with with people sticking electric engines into older cars like that? I've seen a few things on that.
There's some amazing conversions, but there's a fairly high cost to labor in doing that. But that was kind of one of the perverse things why we started this company. I shouldn't even say this, but when we started looking at how we were able to try and address the rising emissions in Tasmania, and we thought, we're going to convert a bunch of cars. And then we had a look around to see where we could get the components to convert the vehicles. We couldn't find them anywhere. So we decided that we were going to start importing second-hand vehicles from Japan and the UK, in the hope that people would start crashing those vehicles and we'd be able to take the batteries and engines and put them into the converted cars. That hasn't happened. We probably won't go down that track because it's not really scalable. But there are companies that are coming out with kits, like drop-in kits, to be able to put into your classic vehicles. If you really, really love your car, that's probably the best way to keep it going into its new life.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard about electric Land Rovers being the next thing.
They're amazing.
That people want to,
Yeah, check out Jaunt, Felton. They're doing that. Rove are doing Hiluxes and Ford Rangers. Yeah, there's a bunch of companies out there doing old combis, doing Porsches.
Yeah. I mean, that appeals to me more than, I don't know why. I think it's just because it feels like there's just so much being wasted when you scrap cars. And I get that but
yeah.
What would be the difference? We're talking, I know you said labor costs, but if you're talking about a $30,000 to $50,000 car, surely it can't cost more than that to retrofit an old car that you're going to chuck in the paddock.
Yeah, no, it depends on how you're sourcing those batteries as well, particularly if you are taking them from a vehicle which has got panel damage and you're just taking out the batteries. But yeah, I think there are a lot of studies that are done though as well, comparing the carbon cost of just driving your old car into the ground, which I always thought that's by far the better way because of all the embodied energy in the vehicle. But actually, the manufacturing of a vehicle is about 5 to 7 tons of CO2 for an electric car, which is, a fair bit. But when you're offsetting, if you're driving 14,000 Ks a year, you're offsetting close to 3 tons of CO2 every year. So the first couple of years of driving that vehicle, you've already paid down your carbon debt, even of manufacturing. So driving an old inefficient car into the ground, you're still going to be pumping out all that CO2 for every single year of operation. And so unfortunately, I think the best way is just to scrap them and make best use of all those resources as well.
A couple more questions. So in terms of, I know we have talked a lot about apartments and we should be talking a little bit more about renters, but is there any advice that you would give for how to deal with an owners corporation and speaking to organizations about how to get more solar into apartments? Do you want to speak to that, Catalina?
Build a case for it, even, go ahead and get a quote and let the owners corporation know what the benefits of solar are. But first of all, also investigate if it's really worth it, and who is ready to pay for it. You will need, a 75% majority here, I think in Victoria, and maybe 51% in New South Wales. To go ahead with solar. So make sure it's all ready to go. Sometimes when you put the sole share from IU to be able to share that electricity, it might double the cost of the system. It depends. So this is something to take into account, and who is ready to move ahead and use that and pay for it as well.
There's some great resources that I've found from New South Wales government, at least, that give you templates for being able to talk to your strata, and I think that's really important to have those right legal templates in place. So that's New South Wales Climate and Energy Action, and they also have the similar templates for being able to get EV chargers into apartments when you're retrofitting them.
I think you were right before, though. The demand for it is just going to force owners corporations to have to start to think about it in terms of retrofitting and also in terms of new developments. And, there's a question here about how to charge an EV when you have no driveway and no street parking. What do you suggest to that one?
There's a lot of people who do that, and they just rely on the public parking, or they park and charge at work, or a lot of supermarkets have low level chargers as well that you can go and charge at. But don't buy a car if you don't need to. If you can get a bike or public transport, that's a much better way. And I think there's a point about sharing solar and sharing batteries. Like, sharing cars is actually a really good, efficient way. I think for apartment dwellers, not everybody needs to have a car that's sitting in a parking spot that costs you an extra $50,000 on top of your apartment, that it's going to sit there just taking up space for 99% of its time. Car shares in apartments make a lot of sense.
And there's a electric car share?
There is, yeah. There are electric car shares. We've got a couple of apartments here in Hobart that we've got a few electric vehicles in there. It's nice when it's a closed cohort because everybody's accountable to that vehicle as well. In Melbourne, there's OMI, which is an electric vehicle car share for big apartments. OMI Home. Yeah, there's quite a few car share models out there.
And there's also, I saw in my research, there's some of the bigger car rental brands are bringing in electric vehicles so that you can try them.
There are, and then there's awesome car rental companies which are like peer-to-peer or peer car rental companies like Evie, where you can list your own electric vehicle on like the Airbnb of EV car rental.
I mean, I think there's definitely space for people to have a go, much like what we've talked about with heat pumps or with any other form of electric technology that people are wary of, the benefits of them or how easy they are to use, or all of the kind of basic questions that you have when you're trying new things. So we're going to thank you, everyone. We're going to move close to wrapping up, but I guess I will ask each of you now to give me sort of your one takeaway or the one sort of message that you want to leave the audience with about this big topic. Catalina, do you want to go first?
The takeaway for me is to not wait. If you have the means, do it. If you don't, talk to your council, talk to your MP, talk to your neighbors. But go ahead. The time is now. There's so much happening. We have all the technology available to do it, and just to go for it.
I like that one. Jenny, do you want to give us your takeaway?
I think it goes back to the first comment that I made about it's very unusual to buy an asset for your home that will actually make you money. And so solar is one of those. We talk about the cost of delay. You'd be surprised that how many people say, oh yeah, I was going to get solar a couple of years ago and I didn't get around to it. I'm doing it now. And I have to bite my tongue not to say, do you know how much money you could have saved in those 2 years if you bloody just made a decision? So it's hard because it's not like a solar, the consumer space for solar and batteries, as we've talked about today, it's tough. You don't know who to trust. There's so many options out there, and we find a lot of people it's just easier to put it off than make a decision and be worried that you're making a bad decision. And when you kind of go, yeah, I'll get to that next month, or I'm still not sure, think about that cost of delay every month that you put off getting your solar panels as a first starting point. you are losing an opportunity to save money, and you're going to take longer to pay that system off. So just bite the bullet, ask lots of questions, get 3 quotes, don't get 20, because you'll just confuse the heck out of yourself if you get too many. And try and find a good company to talk to, and yeah, just go ahead and do it. There's lots of finance options available, electricity retailers. Some of them have got great real genuine interest-free offerings, and virtual power plants for batteries to make them cheaper. So there's lots of options around to help make that financial payment a little bit easier as well.
Awesome, thank you. And Ant?
Ride your bike. But if you are going to drive an electric car, then there's lots of things to look out there. If you're able to take advantage of the fringe benefit tax exemption now, it's a great way to get a new electric car at a really affordable price. Probably one of the greatest tax raws out there at the moment.
Take advantage of it.
Yeah, totally. It's a great way to stimulate EV uptake, and hopefully they'll come out as much more affordable secondhand vehicles. We still haven't got fuel efficiency standards in place yet, so we'll be putting some resources onto our website for how to talk to your local minister to be able to put a bit more pressure and make sure that they come out. They should have been released already, but without proper fuel efficiency standards, we're just going to be the dumping ground of petrol and diesel vehicles that the rest of the world doesn't want. And we actually need to have that to make manufacturers service Australia, because otherwise we're just a small market at the end of the world that isn't really going to get a look in. So we need to do as much as we possibly can.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for that very broad and detailed and wide-ranging conversation about solar batteries and EVs. I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it, as did I. And that brings us to the end of our session. So thank you, each of you, for joining us tonight and giving us your time and your expertise. And thanks again to our sponsors, Pure Electric, the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate, and Be Energy Efficient. We're also very grateful to our funders, the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and Boundless Earth. So we have one more session coming in our Getting Off Gas Toolkit webinar series on trades, wiring and troubleshooting. Be sure to join us next Wednesday for that one, and you can check out all of the sessions on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.